Right, hi, well, welcome, James. Thank you for joining us today for our viewers and our listeners as well. So, arranged to talk today because the Sutton Trust have created a report around learning in lockdown. As you know, we do support schools in terms of HR, but also a lot of our clients are our parents as well, business
Mhm.
owners, and trying to juggle everything that's going on. So I thought it'd be really good to just kind of get your thoughts today. But before we do, not everybody may have heard of the Sutton Trust, so I'd let you just kind of introduce yourself and what the Sutton Trust does.
Great, thanks, Emma. Yes, I'm James Turner. I'm the CEO of the Sutton Trust, and the Sutton Trust is an education charity. It was set up about 25 years ago by a man called Peter Lample, who came from quite sort of humble background, but was lucky enough to make some money. And has devoted a lot of his life to giving that money back to good causes. So everything we do is about social mobility. So it's essentially about making sure that all young people have the same chances in life, regardless of where they're born, how wealthy their parents are, or where they go to school. So we do research and policy work, which is I think we're going to talk about today, but we also help about 7,000 young people every year. So any parents or teachers who are listening, if you go to suttontrust.com, there's information on all the sort of programs we run, particularly for sixth formers, particularly to help them to get into university and apprenticeships.
Fantastic. I'm just thinking, I was, again, having read the report, I know I mentioned my son's doing A-level sociology and he's actually covering education at the moment. I thought,
Well,
this is very interesting.
yeah, no, definitely have a dig around our website because there's some good research reports in there, which is obviously very welcome to use.
Yeah, lovely. So got a few questions for you. So I know you're a very busy man, particularly at the moment with the impact that this is having. So the report covered so many different areas in terms of the impact that lockdown potentially will or is having on children and young people's education. What would you say would be the main findings? That obviously we'll put a link to the full report when we share this with people, but what were the kind of main findings that people should be aware of or need to be aware of?
Yeah, well, with the research, we surveyed hundreds of parents and teachers, and we were particularly interested in the impact that the second period of school closures was having on all children, but particularly disadvantaged children, children from poorer backgrounds. And it follows on from some research we did in April last year, which is obviously when we had the first period of school closures, and we wanted to see how things had changed, how they got better, what were still some of the challenges. And I guess what we found from both those reports is that what sort of homeschooling and remote learning looks like is very different for different children depending on background. So poorer children are struggling most with learning at home, as you might expect. They have issues with access to a reliable internet connection. They may not have a device like a laptop or a tablet to access homeschooling, or if they do, they might share it between lots of siblings. We also found that they were less likely to have a quiet space to work, so they're often sort of working in a busy room with lots of other children where their parents were also trying to work. And of course, those parents from poorer backgrounds, on average, just felt less confident supporting their children's home learning, but both because of their own experience of education, but also because often they were working jobs which took them out of the home, or they didn't have as much time to devote to homeschooling. So the sum of all of that essentially is that the amount of learning that young people from poorer backgrounds are doing while lockdown is happening, while schools are closed, is lower than their better off classmates, and the quality is lower as well in terms of the engagement and how much they're engaging with the work and the quality of the work they're handing in. So the reason we're worried about this is because obviously before the pandemic struck, there was this gap between poor children and everybody else in terms of how well they did in life, how well they did in exams. And we think this is going to grow because of what's happening at present.
Which brings me very nicely on to my next question. So we talk to a lot of both employers and employees, and also, I'm a parent and most people in our team are parents as well. So the toll of working, mainly a lot of people from home, some people not. And I use the word attempting to homeschool. And I know it is now more school from home because schools have had more time to get ready, a lot more resources. But some organisations have been able to furlough employees to support parents, which is great. But a lot can't do that because they've still got a business to run. As from your background in education, but also perhaps as a parent, what advice would you give to parents to what's the best thing they can do for their children, regardless of what age they might be, when perhaps they don't have as much time. So they're still, like I said, they're still trying to work, got children of different ages, etc., etc. What would maybe be your top advice?
Yeah, well, I mean, absolutely, Emma, as you said, schools are much more geared up to home learning than they were before. So schools are providing more. So hopefully that gives a bit more structure to the day to all parents, which is obviously great. And also anecdotally, when we speak to parents, when parents contact us, I guess the reassuring thing to some extent is that all parents, whatever their background, are struggling in different ways. And that could be of time, it could be because of resources, it could be because they don't have enough confidence. And I think one of the key things, I guess, to recognise it is a very hard situation. I think also as a parent, you're not the teacher, so you have a sort of different role. And so to recognise that, and to lower your expectations, you're not expected to be a trained professional in the way the teachers are, I think can take off some of the pressure. Yeah. I mean, I think young children, particularly primary school children, one of the best things you can do generally for their development and education is read to them. Make sure they're engaged in books and that the books are at the right level, because it's the quality rather than the quantity that's really important. That they understand it, discuss it with them, all of those things that many parents do. But even for older children, I think one of the best things you can do is provide a structure to the day. I think routine is really important in making sure that young people are ready to learn so they can make the most of whatever the school is providing. And in that day, there's obviously time for learning, but there's also time for exercise, going outside, eating, some social activities as far as you can during lockdown. So I think that structure and giving a routine, is really important, and that's where parents can make a real difference. And if it's not there, it's actually even harder for the school to be able to do a good job in sort of teaching.
Yeah. Fantastic, brilliant. Yeah, because again, lots of different experiences from speaking to lots of people. So fabulous. And like I said, we work with quite a few schools now in terms of being a HR provider in different ways. And we've shared this report with them and also sent it to sociology teachers. I've sent it to lots of people because it was so interesting. But it could appear from looking at it that there's, in relation to the potential impact on attainment levels, that there's not much that's within their control. Is there anything that you would advise that maybe, whether that's head teachers, leadership teams, teachers, or any other roles? Obviously, a lot of the people who will see this video are either head teachers or perhaps HR managers within schools. Is there anything you think that schools could be doing that are going to help to plug that gap?
Well, I think it is really tough for individual schools, and a lot of the policy asks in our paper, as you say, Emma, are around what the government should do in terms of increased resources, increased focus on disadvantaged students. But I know that lots of teachers are recognising the constraints of the situation, recognising the government isn't always going to do exactly what the teaching profession, the sector wants. So they're sort of making up for it themselves. So lots of schools have used their own resources to step in and buy laptops and tablets for students who don't have them. They've galvanised links in the community and in business to try to get some of those, that IT equipment into schools, which I think is really great. I also think lots of schools are being very imaginative in about how they both help students in lockdown, but also how they might help them when they're back in terms of catching up. So, we have a sister charity called the Education Endowment Foundation, which has a lot of advice for teachers on, with limited funds, what are some of the best bets in terms of where you might spend that money. So there's tutoring, there's the National Tutoring Programme, which we're very supportive of, but there are other ways that schools can spend their marginal pound on making a real difference. But it is very difficult, because I think a lot of it comes down to resources, making sure the extra money invested in school is proportionate to the scale of the challenge, which is huge. It's the biggest challenge we've had in education for some time.
Great, thank you. And my final question, which you've answered a little bit of actually, but the support of the local business community has been amazing, not just in relation to schools, but just generally in terms of, if there is a bright side to this situation, I think it is what we've seen people can do when they come together. And I'm sure that's the same all over the country. So is there any way that business can support perhaps the work of either the Sutton Trust or perhaps their local schools to help in the situation?
Yeah, I mean, if anybody wants to support our work generally, they have a look at our website, suttontrust.com, and there's a sort of donate now button. But if you want to do something, more locally, more in your community, which I completely understand, then as I said, I think there's a lot of schemes up and running now, run by newspapers, the BBC, organisations like Business in the Community, but also local charities, to try to get business support into schools, whether that's in terms of IT equipment and spare IT equipment they may not be using. But there's also other ways, I suppose, particularly when schools come back, that can volunteers and mentors help schools to catch up. I think if businesses and parents and volunteers can sort of work through an intermediary, that's always quite useful for schools, because head teachers are so busy and there's only so much information they can absorb. So if there's a local charity or tutoring organisation, wherever it might be. But equally, if you've got a great link with your school, I think having a conversation with the head teacher about what might be most useful. But of course, always bearing in mind that it's a really busy time for teachers. So even if they don't bite your hand off, it doesn't mean they don't need your support. It means that there's other things that are more pressing at present. But it's about building a long-term relationship with the school, where I think it can make the most difference.
Thank you very much. So thank you ever so much, James. I know you've got to dash off, busy man, but thank you ever so much. And I will, what I'll do is I'll put the link to the Sutton Trust and a sister charity within the newsletter. And thank you ever so much for joining us today.
Great, thanks, Emma.
Thank you.